Most men misunderstand attraction. They think it is about charm, effort, or being good enough. They are wrong. Women are not drawn to kindness. They are drawn to triggers that spark unconscious obsession, mechanisms buried deep in their perception of power, scarcity, and control. These triggers are invisible levers. They cannot be bargained for, earned, or coaxed. When a man activates them correctly, he becomes unforgettable, almost dangerously magnetic, without saying a word. This is not about seduction. It is about psychological authority. Every moment you are predictable, available, or emotionally transparent, you lose influence. Every subtle choice can either ignite fascination or extinguish it. This script exposes 3 psychological triggers that every man must understand if he wants a woman to fixate on him. Each trigger operates below her conscious awareness, bending her attention, curiosity, and desire toward you. Mastering them is not optional. It is the difference between being forgotten and being irresistible. By the end, you will see attraction as a structure, a map of consequence and perception, not a feeling. The men who fail remain visible, ordinary, and endlessly replaceable. Those who understand these triggers gain silent power. Trigger 1. Scarcity creates obsession. Scarcity is the first lever of obsession, and it is far more powerful than charm, money, or attention. When a man becomes scarce in presence, predictable in behavior, and selective in access, he automatically activates a psychological mechanism in a woman that few men even understand exists. This is not about absence for the sake of manipulation alone. It is about the perception of value. The mind of a woman evaluates worth not by what is given freely, but by what is limited, by what cannot be owned effortlessly. A man who is constantly available signals low value. He broadcasts predictability and accessibility, 2 qualities that extinguish desire before it can ever spark. Scarcity is not mere distance. It is controlled invisibility, a carefully measured withdrawal that forces attention, curiosity, and unconscious investment. The moment you remove yourself from the field of constant attention, you create a vacuum. The human mind hates a vacuum. Women, like all humans, instinctively seek to fill it. You do not ask for intrigue. You engineer it by limiting exposure and withholding predictability. Consider the way interactions escalate when you are scarce. A woman will replay conversations, reinterpret gestures, and project fantasies precisely because she is left without certainty. Obsession does not emerge when you are present for every call, text, or demand. Obsession emerges when your presence is a reward, not a constant supply. Scarcity forces the mind to work. Memory reconstructs your words. Imagination inflates your actions. Desire amplifies. This is why men who are overly accommodating or always available fail. They teach your brain that you are replaceable, that your attention carries no consequence. Scarcity teaches her the opposite. You cannot create obsession by trying harder. You create it by becoming a man who cannot be monopolized, whose attention is a finite resource, and whose absence is felt as a psychological void. But scarcity alone is not enough. It must be paired with strategic behavior. If a man simply ignores or withdraws unpredictably without mastery, it signals disinterest, weakness, or instability. The manipulation must appear effortless, natural, almost incidental, as if your life simply cannot be contained within her sphere. You cultivate a reputation of autonomy, self-possession, and singularity. She senses it instinctively, the subtle tension between desire and impossibility, the pull of what she cannot fully possess. This tension ignites fixation. Scarcity transforms attention into craving. It makes the ordinary unforgettable. Every interaction becomes charged, every gesture amplified, because the mind anticipates absence and assigns value accordingly. A man who understands scarcity does not grovel for notice. He becomes a phantom presence in her world, rare, unpredictable, yet undeniably significant. He speaks less, appears less, and controls timing with precision. The moments he chooses to engage are weighted, imbued with consequence, and this creates a psychological imprint. Desire is no longer rational, it is structural. She begins to think of you when you are gone, to reanalyze the brief moments you offer, to obsess over your absence. You do not create obsession by trying to win. It is born from the perception that you cannot be won. Scarcity is the silent weapon every man must wield. Misuse it, and you appear indifferent or weak. Wield it correctly, and obsession becomes inevitable. Trigger 2. Unpredictability hooks the mind. Predictability is the silent killer of desire. When a man's actions, words, and emotional responses can be anticipated, fascination dies. The mind of a woman craves challenge, subtle tension, and the unknown. It is wired to respond to stimuli that defy expectation. Unpredictability is not chaos. It is a carefully calibrated disturbance in her perception of you. It signals intelligence, control, and depth, qualities that create intrigue without effort. A man who responds always the same way, who laughs when expected, nods when expected, and consents to predictability, becomes invisible. His presence ceases to register as a force, it becomes background noise. Obsession cannot ignite in the soil of certainty. It feeds on the unknown, the gap between expectation and reality. Controlled unpredictability is a strategic weapon. It is expressed in small, precise deviations, a message sent at an unusual hour, an unexpected gesture of attention, a tone that hints at complexity. Each subtle deviation triggers her mind to speculate, project, and analyze. She begins to build scenarios, interpret motives, and imagine possibilities, all about you. This mental engagement is where obsession is forged. Women do not obsess over what is static. They obsess over what challenges their perception, forces them to adjust, and keeps them guessing. The man who cultivates unpredictability understands that his value is amplified when she cannot categorize him, when the rules she applies to others do not fit his behavior. The key is balance. Unpredictability must never appear desperate, manipulative, or erratic. Randomness that stems from insecurity signals weakness, it repels. True unpredictability is deliberate and subtle, a reflection of autonomy. A man who can fluctuate between intensity and absence, attention and detachment, predictability and surprise, signals mastery over himself and over the social environment. She senses this as power, and the mind cannot resist the pull of power that is not fully visible. Every moment she spends decoding you is a moment of investment. Every attempt to predict your behavior strengthens her fixation, because her brain is neurologically wired to pursue patterns in the face of uncertainty. You become a puzzle she cannot solve, a force she cannot anchor, and this is the core of psychological obsession. Unpredictability also exploits emotional contrast. A man who can move from warmth to detachment, engagement to silence, attraction to casual indifference, forces her to constantly recalibrate her emotional expectations. The effect is subtle, almost imperceptible at first, but cumulative. Her mind latches onto every nuance, every deviation from the expected, interpreting it as significance, as proof of depth, as a signal that you cannot be contained. In contrast, a man who is constant, overly agreeable, or entirely readable loses all gravity. Obsession requires challenge, mental stimulation, and the tension of not fully knowing. By introducing unpredictability into every interaction, a man converts ordinary attention into relentless cognitive and emotional engagement. Her thoughts revolve around him involuntarily. Her imagination loops over his patterns, and her desire is stoked not by what he gives, but by what she cannot predict. Trigger 3. Strategic emotional withdrawal. The third trigger is the most powerful, strategic emotional withdrawal. Obsession is rarely born from constant attention, reassurance, or overt validation. It emerges when a man withdraws precisely, when he creates a subtle void in the emotional landscape of a woman, compelling her to fill it with thoughts, projections, and longing. Withdrawal is not coldness for the sake of cruelty, it is mastery. It signals that you are not dependent on her approval, that your internal world is sovereign, and that your attention is a finite resource. Women are wired to pursue what is absent, to assign significance to what is withheld. Every minute of emotional unavailability intensifies fixation. This withdrawal is most effective when combined with the other triggers, scarcity and unpredictability. When a man is scarce, she notices the absence. When he is unpredictable, she is drawn into speculation. When he withdraws emotionally at precise moments, She internalizes a silent tension, a psychological pressure that she cannot rationalize but feels acutely. She begins to chase, to test, to analyze her own reactions, and in doing so, she unwittingly centers her mind around him. The withdrawal must be controlled. It cannot appear reactive, defensive, or inconsistent. It must feel like an inherent property of your character, the natural rhythm of your engagement, punctuated by absence and presence, like a tide she cannot resist. Strategic withdrawal is also about withholding certainty. Women obsess not over men they fully understand, but over men who maintain a layered interior world. The man who gives everything openly leaves nothing to explore. The man who reveals selectively, who offers glimpses but never full access, turns his life into a structure of intrigue. She will project, imagine, and speculate endlessly, filling gaps with desire, fascination, and even idealization. Emotional withdrawal is the invisible architecture of obsession. It builds silently, imperceptibly, but its effect is total. She begins to invest cognitive and emotional energy without permission, without awareness, and without logic. The mastery of this trigger is subtlety. Overuse triggers frustration or resentment. Misuse signals detachment or disinterest. The key is timing. Withdrawal must create a pattern she cannot predict, yet cannot ignore. It must punctuate engagement, creating tension, anticipation, and longing. Her mind becomes attuned to your presence and absence, calibrating desire based on how she perceives your attention's scarcity, your unpredictability, and your selective availability. Emotional withdrawal, when wielded with precision, transforms a woman's casual curiosity into relentless obsession. She is no longer merely interested. She is caught in a psychological loop, replaying moments, interpreting gestures, and seeking validation from a man who is strategically untouchable. The more she pursues, the deeper the fixation, and the more indispensable you become in her internal narrative. Obsession is not granted. It is engineered, and emotional withdrawal is the final mechanism that cements it. Obsession is never accidental. It is not born from charm, flattery, or superficial attention. It is constructed deliberately through the orchestration of psychological levers that few men even recognize: scarcity, unpredictability, and strategic emotional withdrawal. Each trigger amplifies the others, creating a lattice of tension, fascination, and desire that operates beneath conscious awareness. A woman's mind becomes occupied not by what is given to her, but by what she cannot fully grasp, cannot predict, and cannot possess entirely. She does not realize she is being drawn. Her fixation feels involuntary, natural, irresistible. A man who masters these triggers does not seek approval or validation. He does not react to desire. He shapes it. He becomes the architect of attention, the silent force that structures her perception and commands investment without demand. Scarcity creates value. Unpredictability fuels curiosity. Withdrawal converts interest into fixation. Combined, they generate a psychological gravity that pulls her mind toward him continuously. This is power disguised as subtlety, influence hidden in absence, and control exercised without force. Those who fail remain visible, ordinary, and replaceable. They give everything and receive nothing, teaching the mind that attention can be bought cheaply, that presence equals availability. But the man who understands these triggers exists on another level. His influence is invisible, yet absolute. She cannot stop thinking about him because he is everywhere in her mind and nowhere in her reach. He does not chase, he does not plead, he does not explain. He is the standard against which all others are measured, the psychological axis upon which her attention spins, the rare force she cannot ignore. Understanding these triggers is not a guide to being liked. It is a blueprint for being unavoidable. Every gesture, every absence, every subtle shift in behavior is a strategic move in the unseen game of desire. To master them is to wield influence silently, to evoke obsession without speaking, and to occupy her mind with a power she cannot resist. Every man who fails this understanding will remain forgettable. Every man who wields it will become unforgettable. The difference is not in effort. It is in perception, consequence, and control.